Right now, we are going to listen the content from the book Talks with Sri Ramana Maharishi. Before entering the talks, we go through the forward and introduction because this also constitutes some important and relevant information. Let us start. This is not a book to be lightly read and laid aside. It is bound to prove to be an unfailing guide to increasing numbers of pilgrims to the light everlasting. We cannot be just too grateful to Sri Munagal S. Venkat Ramaya, who was known later as Swami Ramananda Saraswati, for the record that he kept of the talks covering a period of 4 years from 1935 to 1939. Those devotees who had the good fortune of seeing Bhagwan Raman will, on reading these talks, become naturally reminiscent and recall with delight their own mental record of the words of the divine and the great master. Despite the fact that the great sage of Arunachal taught for the most part through silence, he did instruct through speech also, and that too lucidly without baffling and beclouding the minds of his listeners. One would wish that every word that Master uttered had been preserved for posterity. But we have to be thankful for what little of the utterances has been put on record. These talks will be found to throw light on the writings of the Master, and probably it is best to study them along with the writings, translations of which are available. Sri Ramana's teachings were not given in general. In fact, the sage had no use for lectures or discourses. His words were primarily addressed to the particular aspirant who felt some difficulty in his spiritual path and sought to have it resolved then and there. But as the same difficulties arise in the quest after the self, and as the method of resolving them is the same, the Maharshi's replies to questions have the quality of universality. It is not all that can ask the right questions or frame them properly. The talks of the Guru, therefore, is not simply to answer to the point as in an examination paper. He has often to get behind the words that constitute a question and correct the questioner even in the matter of questioning. And And when irrelevant and futile questions are asked, it is not his business to satisfy the idle curiosity of the questioner or confirm him in his delusions. Sri Ramana does not leave his interlocutor in the place where he was. As one of the devotees put it, all our questions are from our standpoint, and Sri Bhagavan's replies are from his standpoint. The questions are not only answered but are also undermined. Various are the attitudes with which one may approach a saint, skeptics and agnostics, theists, atheists, seekers of miracles, and hunters of psychic phenomena all used to go to the Maharishi. Each would naturally put questions that came uppermost to his or her mind. And the nature of the questions would depend on the attitude and interest of the person concerned. The glory of the Master lay in removing the attitudes and interests that were base and making the devotee long for realizing the supreme truth. Visitors to the ashram often used to put questions to Sri Ramana about occult powers and psychic phenomena. Is it not good to acquire occult powers such as telepathy? Is not the power to make one's body invisible a mark of mature wisdom? Can one read others' minds? The Master's reply to all such questions was that the occult and the miracles are not the spiritual content. The supernormal powers are more hindrances than help in the path to attain or to understand the Supreme Spirit. Some questioners were interested in matters relating to the dead, that what happens to the dead? Can one see them? Here again, Sri Ramana taught that these problems were irrelevant and that no seeker after the truth should be concerned with them. An aristocratic and distinguished lady visitor once inquired that, Maharajji, can we see the dead? The Master replied to this question in affirmation, yes. The lady asked again that, can the yogis show them to us? The Master said, yes, they may. But don't ask me to show them to you, for I cannot. Then the lady asked that, do you see them? The Master replied, yes, in dreams. Sri Ramana's teaching, or the central teaching, is self-inquiry. Instead of wanting to know this and that, seek to know the self. Ask, who am I? Instead of asking about 100 other things. Self inquiry ought to be the easiest of all the tasks, but it seems to be the most difficult because we have become strangers to ourselves. What one has to do is simple to abide as the self. This is the ultimate truth. This is one's eternal, natural, inherent state. On account of ignorance, we identify ourselves with the not I. The most subtle of all these identifications is with the ego. Let us search for the root of the ego. Wherefrom does this pseudo I arise? At the end of this quest, we shall find that the ego disappears, letting the eternal self shine. So, the best discipline is the inquiry, who am I? And this is termed as the greatest japa. This is also the true pranayam. The thought, I am not the body, naham, is exhalation, that is rechak. The inquiry, who am I, koham, is inhalation, purak. And the realization, I am he, soham, is retention of breath, that is kumbhak. The fruit of self inquiry is the realization that the self is all and that there is nothing else. For those who follow this method, no other sadhana is necessary. But even those who adopt the discipline of devotion or bhakti reach the same goal if one surrenders one's ego to either the Guru or God. One realizes the self. Sri Ramana's teachings, as found in this book, talks will bring hope to everyone. No one need think that he is beyond the pale of redemption. An old American visitor once asked the master that, Maharishi, do you think we are bad boys? The master's charismatic reply was, do not tell me so, but you need not think you are bad boys. Anything that is bad in us will surely be removed if only we listen to the Maharishi's wise words that are recorded in this book. And may we read it with a view to preparing ourselves for understanding the Master's higher teaching, which was through the silence. This ends the foreword of this book. Now we move to the introduction. These talks cover a period of 4 years, as mentioned before in Ford also, that the records were made during 1935 to 1939 by Sri Munagal S. Venkat Ramaya, now Swami Ramananda Saraswati, a very old disciple of Sri Ramana Maharishi. Though a Telugu, By birth, he speaks English and Tamil fluently and is conversant with Sanskrit. These are necessary qualifications for one who wished to record the conversations of Sri Bhagavan with his various disciples and visitors. The 4 years that are covered here were the days when the ashram reached the summit of its glory. Maharshi's health was on the whole good, and the hall where he sat was open day and night to welcome one and all. Visitors flocked there from every corner of the world. There was hardly a country that was not represented at one time or another. The war naturally interfered with this influx, though the number of Indian visitors steadily increased as time went on. But it was these conversations, many with Westerners, that were specially interesting. The modern tendency towards materialism and irreligion, on which the West often prides itself, met its match here. Sri Bhagavan Ramana Maharishi glowed like the sun, and even those who did not understand him or agree with his words were fascinated and could not help but be elevated and relaxed by his presence. Though Sri Venkataramaya was fully qualified for the work, to follow Sri Bhagavan was no easy task when he once started to talk. He had such a command of his subject that he was never at a loss for a word in whichever language he might happen to be speaking. So few notes could be taken, the listeners being too busy trying not to lose a word of what was being said, added to which it was not always easy to understand. Sri Venkataramaya acted as interpreter for the many English-speaking people who flocked to the ashram, as Sri Bhagavan was reluctant to say more than a few words in that language, though he knew it sufficiently well to read the English newspapers and magazines. But to act as interpreter was an even more difficult task than just recording. The flow of words was so steady that no interval was left in which their meaning could be conveyed to the ardent questioner. Often Sri Bhagavan had to be asked and requested to wait while his words were conveyed to the anxious listener. So the difficulties of making this record can easily be imagined. Only one who had sat for years at the feet of the Master and had thoroughly absorbed his philosophy and the way he expounded it was competent for the task, and Sri Venkataramaya, the ideal person for this, had luckily been found and chosen. That the language used here is not always elegant is admitted, and this was to be expected in the circumstances. Doubtless it could have been corrected, but it has been left as much as it was felt that a certain spontaneity that it now possessed would otherwise have been lost. Though the conversations were in various South Indian languages, most of it was recorded in English, the rest in Tamil and Telugu, which passages have been translated for the purpose of this book. The completed notes were often shown to the questioners for verification, but the whole had the seal of approval of Sri Ramana Maharishi himself. As the records were always shown to him for his approval or the necessary alteration after they had been entered in the notebook. Thus, we may be sure that here we have the exact teaching of the Divine Master, and reading them, we once again sit at his feet in the old hall, drinking in every word that falls from his lips, enraptured by his smile, the movement of his delicate hands, and his actions. For he was a true artist, often acting the part of the story he was telling, the better to drive home his point. Some may be inclined to criticize this book as monotonous, but this supposed monotony is deliberate, for some new point is always brought out, however similar the talk may seem. Remember this point again, that in this book we may feel that the talks are similar in nature, but every time we listen the talk, something new will come from that similar words also. Sri Bhagavan always stressed the one essential truth that was necessary for liberation, that there is only one self and nothing but the self. Know that, and everything else is known. This cannot be repeated too often. Doubtless, an intellectual grasp of this fact sets one on the path, but the path once started, mental knowledge must then become actual experience. To know a thing absolutely, not just superficially, one must be that thing, otherwise, knowledge is incomplete or may confuse the listener, and Raman Maharshi never confused a single human being who raised him. As I pointed out, we are always nothing but the self, but associating ourselves with the ignorance of limitation within ego, we forget the seer and identify ourselves with the seen. But what can we do about it? The habit is so long standing, birth after birth has been imagined, and century after century has been fabricated by the mind. It has thus involved itself more and more in ignorance than it now finds itself disinclined, and even if willing, almost unable to disentangle itself from the thralls of the play world it has created. You are the self, he tells us, nothing but the self, and anything else is just imagination. So be the self here and now, and there is no need to run off to a forest or shut oneself in a room. Carry on with your essential activities, but free yourself from association with the doer of them. Self is the witness, and you are that. Example after example is given in these talks in language to suit all tastes and mentalities. The reading of the book automatically drives one inward to the source. It is itself a sufficient sadhana. Don't delude yourself. You are already that. There is nothing more to be obtained, only false association to be shed, limitation to be recognized as illusory. His method of doing this is well known: self inquiry. Always and at all times seek for the source of the ego, the apparent actor, and on the attainment of that goal, he tells us the ego will drop away of its own accord and nothing will be left but the all blissful self. But this is not the place to go into details of method for those interested. The necessary books can easily be obtained from Sri Ramana Ashram. What more is there to say but to advise one and all to read and to listen this book and try and make it a part of ourselves. Not one word to be passed over lightly, or one conversation to be dismissed as superfluous. It is all pure gold. And here again we find the ever-living Sri Ramana Maharishi before us in person, teaching us in his own inimitable words for our benefit and delight. It was found after preparing this book for the press that the first part was not in the chronological order, but rather than delay publication, it was decided not to alter the present arrangement, as it makes absolutely no difference to the context. The dates are only included for a reference and as a guarantee of authenticity. Here, the introduction part is over, and before we enter the talks, one last thing is the note by the recorder. He said, in a very critical and distressing period of his time, humble devotees sought the presence of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharishi for his own peace of mind and lived in the ashram with the kind permission of Sarvadhikari Sri Niranjanananda Swami. The seeker took it upon himself to note down as occasions arose the sweet, refreshing, and enlightening words of the Master. This self imposed task was undertaken for the purification of his own mind and better understanding of the subtle and profound words of Sri Bhagavan. Shortly after, the Sarvadhikari officially took them over to the ashram, and these notes covering the period of 4 years are included over here with hope that some readers may find them interesting and helpful in their spiritual quest. Thanks for listening. We move to the talks with Sri Ramana Maharishi in the next audio. Thanks again for listening and putting your ears on.